Tekton results, what we store in the results. Currently, we store all pipeline runs and all task runs. And given some statistic I was following, I've seen something between 2, 3, up to 10% of pipeline runs that we store, they actually canceled. And I started considering as an optimization to add some feature to results, which will allow to set the results instance to ignore and not store canceled pipeline runs. The thinking behind it is that usually what we store in Tekton results is used either for debugging or for auditing. Maybe there are other different other use cases, but that's the main use cases that I can think of. So yeah, the proposal here is, do we have any interest in skipping storing of canceled pipeline runs? Again, pipeline run can be canceled because user decided to manually cancel it, or it could be canceled because we are running a test on a PR and then we updated this PR, so the pipeline run is automatically canceled. Yeah, that's the background.
I'll go first. I think about the what would the user experience be if, let's say, you and I are sharing a namespace and you launch a pipeline run and then I cancel it on the cluster, and then you say, what happened because we didn't communicate? And you go to look in the Konflux UI to see what happened to your pipeline run. And if it were not stored in results and it had been garbage collected, then would it be the case that you would just get a 404 for the pipeline run that you thought you had launched?
So yeah, that's one case where the user could be surprised. Obviously, I don't think it's a use case that we see frequently, because people should not cancel pipeline runs of someone else. That's when they they cancel the pipeline on purpose. Yeah, maybe that's one case. We would like to keep those canceled pipeline runs in the results.
I think with that in mind, part here too is that, like, I don't understand what kind of, if we're doing this as an optimization for the database, but I don't know what kinds of gains we would expect to get if we were to not store canceled pipeline runs. But it seems to me that the user experience edge case of not being able to find kind of any record of a canceled pipeline run in the live system would like outweigh a benefit that we might get. And we could be looking for performance optimizations maybe somewhere else. For instance, maybe looking at processes to garbage collect old pipeline runs from pull requests that maybe even were successful, but if they're older than, say, 6 months, then delete them to free up space and make things easier on the indexes.
Yeah, this is completely different use case. And your first point, there are two performance gains in this case. The first one is obviously we process less objects. That's one thing. Second thing is that we are storing those pipelines, the data of those pipeline runs in a database, and then obviously having less data will give us some gains in terms of performance when we look into that data. So that's why I thought maybe it's a good thing, because in both cases we have some gains. But yeah, we need to think about edge cases. That's why I'm bringing the topic here. Thank you.
Do you think you could get any advantage out of storing only, maybe this is nonsense, but storing only the pipeline run and not the task runs for a canceled pipeline run?
We can look into this, but I think it will be even more confusing. I mean, I understand you probably want to leave some pointer into some reference to what might have happened to a pipeline run when someone is confused and don't find them. Yeah, maybe we can think of something else to have that reference stored somewhere. That we didn't store information about specific pipeline run, but I think it will make the whole thing even more complex, which I want to avoid anyway.
Yeah, it makes sense. I see Adam's hand.
Oh, I just like, I'm with you, Ralph. I don't think we should remove any sort of, like, we should still store canceled or even failed pipeline runs. Just like, honestly, as far as I know, I don't remember, like, when I used GitHub, I don't remember them like garbage collecting these. And in general, I believe like, if there are companies that can handle like thousands and millions of records, we should somehow be able to do the same.
Emil, did you get the feedback you needed?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, cool.
Thank
Okay,
you.
well, thank you for bringing it up. It's a good conversation. We'll move on to the next point. If nothing else, everybody reach out to Emil if you got further thoughts on it for sure. Eric, you're up next with merging various Konflux SIG meetings with this one.
All right. So as you may have known, we had a dedicated SIG for strictly non-technical community-related stuff about Konflux, and we meet bi-weekly every other Thursday. I already had some notes or remarks during this meeting on looking for potential student program mentors with interesting ideas that we could give as homeworks or assignments to the students, just to promote the building of the community. Now, this meeting is already, and if you look at last meeting's agenda, there was a open source summit trip report, which doesn't necessarily have to be completely technical. If you just speak ideas. If you take all of that into account, and this idea is originally not from my head. This was actually brought up last week by Brian, so full credit goes to Brian. Now I can continue. That it might be worth that we actually joined all of the other Konflux interest groups within this meeting, so that we can actually get even more participants. Not just talking technical stuff, but also the non-technical stuff. And who knows, we may that might spark interesting discussions. After all, we're just engineers, all of us. So yeah, that's the pitch I was going to make. Again, full credit goes to Brian. So I'd like to hear some ideas, whether it's a feasible idea and we could make the announcement, or there is some resistance and we should keep the group separate. Go ahead, Brian.
I guess I'll just say, I think we would get more people there by combining them. And in the case that potential contributors show up in their first time, it would be cool if there were 19 people on the call instead of 2, as happened the other day in the community meeting. But I would caution that if we do this, we should try to encourage some strict prioritization of topics, because like on other community meetings I've joined, it is the worst experience when you go to your first community meeting and the first thing they start doing is talking about some pull request on an extremely deep esoteric detail of the system.
Agreed. That would probably be a task for the moderator. But in any case, the good thing about this call is that it's a weekly call. And so if something doesn't make it to the agenda, well, it's only a another week away from potentially being discussed, rather than two, which is the case for the Konflux and Fedora interest group, as well as the other community forum.
I'll jump in and I'll say, I think at the end of the day, I'm in favor of it to combine them with this meeting, but I'll play devil's advocate for a moment just to think about other reasons, other shapes of the community that might be. And one is that when I am joining another community, I typically will first find their like big roll-up call, kind of like this. And I find that I can't participate as a new person because it's a big group. It's 20 to 40 people. And what am I going to do and say on the agenda short of just introduce myself? But they often will have smaller breakout working groups who are working on something. And if I join that and there's only 3 other people, well, it's not that I'm not like under impressed at how small the group is, but rather I'm excited because now it's a small conversation that I can be a part of. And I feel like I'm not interrupting or excluding other people from talking who would be more rightful to speak in that group than me because I'm a new person coming along. And so in that way, I think the small groups have value. I'll say a second thing, which is when we were moving our project from being a Red Hat only project to trying to create an open source infrastructure and governance for the project, I had imagined or hoped that all of our Red Hat teams, engineering teams who are focused on sort of sub parts of Konflux would take their team and transform their team into a SIG in its own right. Right now we have 2 very niche SIGs on paper, the Fedora SIG and the community outreach SIG. But I had hoped that like the integration service maintainers would have an integration SIG where they're not creating an extra meeting for themselves, but they instead take their regular development rituals and turn them into open forums that somebody could join if they were interested in hacking on an integration service with those people. And if you took that vision to its, to its end, then we would have many, many SIGs in that world. And we already have that level of activity. It's really there. It's just you can't penetrate, the community. The communication's all happening in places that are not advertised and not exposed. So, and I this whole time I felt that like it would be inappropriate to try to like mandate or like require that everybody transform their team's own rituals and practices into something like that. I don't think that's right, but I want to leave that door open if any teams do want to do that and start to show the way for how other teams could copy the model.
Thank you, Rolf. I haven't considered that perspective. On the other hand, having a SIG in a regular meeting means that one would expect something on the agenda, which if you divide the interest into too many SIGs, what happens is that you would not have regular contents for these meetings, and people just would stop attending. So whereas with this one, people know, oh, this meeting is going to have even more participants because the agenda is going to grow. So you're guaranteed that you can discuss a topic pretty much every single week, which is not the case with the other ones. And another thing, or another point of view to consider is oftentimes, at least with the community outreach, is what happens is people would like to discuss a topic, but it has a very close connection to some technical aspects. And what happens is that we then redirect these, all these folks who connect to the architecture call to discuss the technicalities. And when we merge it, obviously, you can discuss whatever you want, both the abstract side of things as well as the technicalities. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it should be a decision of the majority. So you should kind of vote on it or something. So to close my topic on the agenda, Ralph, what do you think would be the next course of action? Should I launch some kind of vote in the agenda docs, or shall we do it online? Or obviously we don't have a public Slack yet, so bringing it to just offline to our internal Slack is probably not the best idea.
I was just about to look in sidebar to see if we could just take a straw poll of people on the call today. If they don't,
Oh yeah, we have a mailing list there. That's true.
yeah, some sort of mechanism to take a pulse. I don't know that we need like a formal vote, but if we take a poll and things are clearly one way or another, then I think we can just move forwards with it without having to a larger check. If things are contentious, then we can move to a more formalized vote.
Fine with me.
Yeah.
I swear there's a way to take a vote in here, but I cannot find it.
I'm working on it right now. I think I've got it. I'll say transform the architecture call into a community call.
Yeah.
Combine SIGs into that call as the question, and then we'll give 3 options. Say yes, no, and I want to talk about it more. That sound good? All right, launch. The poll is launched, so you should see it in sidebar. I misworded it slightly. I said transform the architecture call into a community, which like implies this kind of like larger thing. But I mean what Eric was saying, into a community call.
Yeah, just like one of the reasons I recommended this, by the way, was because it's at least my perception that we often end this call early. I don't think we will today, but we often do. If you agree with that, then that might influence your decision here.
I'll also add one other reason. I voted yes already. I've been unable to make the other SIG call. I've been wanting to for like 2 months, and I just can't get there. But I can get to this one, so it's going to help me, scheduling wise.
Nice.
I think when I checked just a second ago, I think we got pretty overwhelming votes for yes here. We could wait and get more votes in, but I think we should proceed and do it. And then if people want to talk about it more, we can, and then evolve and iterate from there. You know what I mean? Like transform it into a community call, and then if we want to make yet another pivot, we can do that next week. Just bring up your idea if you have more you want to talk about on that.
All right.
Cool. Eric, do you want to send out an announcement to the mailing list about it, or would you like something else?
I will. Thank you. Thank you for all your comment.
Appreciate it. Cool. I think that does it. We can move on to the next stop. Thank you again, Eric. We got Adam and Brian up with GitOps as the primary configuration interface. You guys ready to take it away?
Sure. Adam, how do you want to do this? You want me to do this?
You are much better with this, marketing stuff.
Thanks. Okay, I have opened a pull request for ADR 47, which I hope you can see on my screen at the moment. And the ADR describes making a fairly large shift in Konflux to recast how we actually should probably rename it, but it's essentially recasting how we tell users to configure, create and configure tenant resources, meaning components, applications, integration services, release plans, RBAC, and any future objects that we would add. We would deprecate the ability to create and manage these in the user interface that we have today. And we would instead have only the ability to configure them directly via Kubernetes. The ADR casts a new service, which is two new services actually. A GitOps service, which is responsible for syncing tenant GitOps repos that they bring themselves to namespaces, and that would be optional. The user could just use kubectl apply or kubectl create to configure their namespace, but the recommended approach that we would have for users is that they would use GitOps repo. And the second service is what's being called like a, I can't remember what I called it. I've renamed it so many times. The GitOps registration service. And the purpose of the GitOps registration service is so that as a user, I can create my own GitOps repo. And then I can come to the Konflux UI and I do a one-time registration of my GitOps repo. That does a couple of things. It will create the namespace for me that I choose during that registration process. And then it would configure the Argo CD service to be syncing the contents of that GitOps repo to my new namespace. There is a new security section in here that was recommended to be added by Ralph, which I think is worth mentioning, that covers how to make sure that the contents of the GitOps repo are properly isolated from one another, meaning like I should not be able to write something to someone else's namespace. I should not be able to create resources in the namespace that I wouldn't normally be able to create otherwise. And there are a couple approaches that are referenced here that we can use to make sure that those things are done properly. One is using impersonation, and the other is using app projects to map the tenant GitOps repos to the proper namespaces. Those can also be used together. I tried to keep implementation details light, but just mentioned that there are existing practices for how to do these things with some references on where you can read about them. So with all that being said, the user experience and the user interface today, I think, is really excellent for folks who don't want to mess with YAML, are uncomfortable with Kubernetes, have never used Kubernetes, etc. And it's very convenient and fast. And so another point of this proposal is that we would add a VS Code plugin. And the VS Code plugin would essentially have forms-based configuration screens that look very similar to the ones that we have in our UI now. You'd be able to create an application. You'd be able to create an integration test scenario. You'd be able to reconfigure those existing resources. And the difference is that instead of the forms writing directly to Kubernetes like they do in our user interface, those forms would actually be configuring the YAML in the GitOps repo. So you'd be configuring everything locally, and then you would commit that to Git. You would push it up as a PR to whatever CI system you're using or whatever forge you're using, GitLab, GitHub, whatever. And once it's merged, then Argo CD would apply it to your repository. So I'm hoping to marry together kind of the user experience we have now with a GitOps-based workflow. And the reason is because I see that many of our users are choosing to go the GitOps route for the kind of change control and auditability and disaster recovery properties that it offers, which are all great. But the downside of that is that no matter how much work we're doing on the UI to make things nice and easy to use and provide a good experience, they are missing out on most of that. And I think that we should try to pay attention to where our users are going and think about why they're doing that, and then deploy the resources that we have in order to make those users' experiences really good. I had a couple slides, yeah, that you guys can see this. That kind of very high level show what the experience would be like. So this would be visiting the UI to register a new GitOps repository, providing the repository URL and the name of the namespace that you want. This is like some boilerplate authentication. I think ideally we would try and keep the authentication methods we have now, including like the GitHub app. Some of our forges already require like token-based, but the takeaway here is that we should support private GitOps repos as well as public ones. You would be able to register that repository, and you'd get some kind of empty state with a prompt to tell you, hey, you can install a plugin from VS Code Marketplace and some directions. Once you're in VS Code, if you choose to use it, not required again, you'd get forms-based configuration screens like this one where you can create a component, and you'll notice that like the fields and the kind of design of this mirror almost exactly what we have in the create component screen today. With the difference being, again, that the output ends up being YAML like this in a component YAML file or something inside the repo. And once you would commit this and get it merged to main, then it would end up being deployed to your namespace. And so this would become the primary configuration and resource creation loop, whether you use the VS Code plugin or not. That's the gist of it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just like I would just add that you still should be able to run your pipelines and do these kind of actions through UI. This is specific about configuration.
Yep.
You will configure everything using GitOps, but like you can restart test or run pipeline or do whatever, like these kind of actions you still can do through UI.
Yeah, that's correct. And the ADR specifies that you'd be able to run pipelines, view logs, view pipeline runs, view results, and fire off integration tests, start manual releases. All those things would stay. It's just the things that create and configure CRs that would be deprecated. Persistent CRs, I should say. Emil?
Yeah, when thinking about GitOps, one thing which comes to mind is managing of secrets. I guess you've thought about it.
I have, and I had a bunch of stuff in here about secrets, and it was like making this proposal confusing. So I pulled it out and I want to put it in as a different ADR. But with this ADR just by itself, you would still have to create secrets via the user interface because clearly you don't want to put your secrets in a GitOps repo. But I think what we want to converge to later is that we would be recommending that people do GitOps-based secret configuration using ESO, right? And so we would provide external secrets operator as a companion optional cluster service, and it would be deployed per cluster. It would need to have some secret store, and then we could offer like a full GitOps experience, including for secrets configuration.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. And my second question is how we are going to expose errors because sometimes the Argo CD errors are a bit confusing, hard to find.
Yep. I think that I haven't entirely fleshed that out, but the first kind of thing you can see hinting at something like that is there's like a GitOps sync active bubble on the screen. And I think we would use some kind of indicator like that to show the user that their GitOps sync is healthy. And then maybe not healthy, we can have an indicator there that can help the user to find the logs for the sync of their particular repo to their namespace so that they can troubleshoot.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to say that I think the term to use would be control plane resources. At least I think that's the way our documentation discusses them, that application component, integration test scenario, release plan are control plane resources. They're long-lived. And things like snapshot and release and pipeline run are data plane resources. They're typically generated by the system. They're typically short-lived. And we would, I think there's, unless there's some magic technique in that, there's some technique in Argo that I don't know. I think the data plane resources never belong as a part of the system, because like if you create a release in your GitOps repo and Argo applies it to the cluster, right away your content gets released. And then later our pruner will remove that release, but then Argo would reapply the release, creating it, releasing your content over and over again. That doesn't make sense. But for like from the user experience point of view, we should think about how that's supposed to be handled. If they're gonna want a GitOps repo for those control plane resources, for some data plane resources, they probably also want a similar experience, but Argo may not be the right tool for that.
Yeah, so we probably need to configure Argo to not sync those data plane resources, though, at least at first, right?
At least.
Adam?
Well, two things, like if we are able at least to create namespace, we can use issue dashboard just to say like there are some issues with your GitOps syncs. Like that's what the issue dashboard was created for this kind of events. And the second question is just like my question, and maybe you change it in the ADR. Is there a possibility that one namespace is administered by multiple GitOps repositories, or that's not something you want to like support?
Not in the ADR. I mean, if somebody
Okay.
thinks there's a reason to debate that, we can debate it. But the ADR right now clearly states that the relationship is one GitOps repo to one namespace, and like that's it.
Yeah, that works for me.
So like that means that like if you want to create two applications in one namespace, that's fine. One GitOps repo, right? But if you want to create two applications in two namespaces, you have to bring two GitOps repos.
Mm-hmm.
And follow-up question to that: how do you imagine in the normal cluster, in Red Hat clusters, how do you imagine this like registration to work? Like, should it be like automatically how it is in the presentation, or will there be some like middle step of maybe Gal or somebody having to accept the registration?
Yeah,
or that's too deep?
Gal strongly thinks we need an approval step, and I'm fine with that. I have not worked that into the ADR yet, how that would work.
I don't know that Gal thinks that we need an approval step. I mean, he's not here to speak for himself, but he should at some point. But I think what he would care about is the ability to turn off registration for certain clusters. Once a cluster becomes full, nobody's going to approve anything. You just can't register yourself with that.
That could at least be the first step. I had also included like this idea of a very lightweight fleet management feature in here originally, and again, it was like exploding the scope of this ADR, so I removed it. But as like an imagined future state, imagine you could hit any cluster registration endpoint like of any of our clusters, and that the clusters had like a central metadata point that they could read from, that they would know that the other clusters exist and which ones were accepting new registrations and were not, and could like help redirect you to if you went to a cluster that had like registrations closed off, could help like move you to another cluster with registration that was open with the same like network zone capabilities like public, private, etc. Right? So I think that there's an opportunity for us to like make that better, but I think again the first thing we could do is just add to this ADR that it must be possible to just like turn off registration for a cluster.
Can we maybe like touch on that offline, this let's say multi-cluster setup? Because I can imagine like some RHDA, like backstage plugin and this kind of shenanigans can improve it. And maybe is this maybe also a step? And it is mentioned in ADI like abstracting users from clusters altogether. But that I mean like obviously they still need to connect to the clusters to see what is happening. But maybe they register to Konflux and not to specific cluster. Is there some sort of idea in the future to go into that direction, or that's like too far?
I'm trying not to take us into like we've all been through a lot of like transparent multi-cluster kind of stuff, and I don't want to get all back into that. What I proposed is like super lightweight, like clusters all have like some shared metadata about each other that they can expose to the user. So, Ralph.
I want to make clear. So I think the fundamental idea in the ADR is that we make GitOps a first-class thing.
Yep.
And how we do that is specified in the ADR, that we give users their own GitOps repo that's totally under their control, VS Code plugin and so on. But we should be clear that that's a choice. Like we could have GitOps be a first-class experience, and there could be a GitOps mono repo for the cluster as an alternative. And there's various reasons to not want to do that, which I think you discussed in the ADR. But we should call out a thing that we lose in that is the ability to make atomic changes to every unatomic change to every namespace in the cluster. With a mono repo for the cluster, in one pull request and one commit, we can migrate, for instance, all of the custom resources from groups API v1 to groups API v2 and so on. That with fragmented GitOps repos, we'll need to change the API on the cluster, and everyone will be broken until they can somehow upgrade their content. And that matches the pattern that we have for .tecton repos, right? Where we have to like manage en masse GitOps or Git repos of our users. But it adds some complexity. We trade off complexity there.
Yeah, that's true. Adam?
Maybe like a silly question, but do you think there is a possibility that for like the, let's say, enterprise clusters, let's call it that, we will disable users' ability to create manual resources, manual control plane resources, just so we don't end up in a situation where either users use GitOps or they create resources manually? Like, do you see something like this happening?
So
Or is that
having the
something we want to
ability,
do?
so having the ability to force them to use GitOps, you mean?
Yes. For enterprise
Yeah.
clusters, not obviously when you are like, having your own cluster, you can do whatever you want.
Yep. I think that seems actually pretty reasonable. I mean, I think that for enterprise production usage, you would want the disaster recovery properties of GitOps usage. And I think I can imagine an enterprise user wanting the capability to keep people from just applying it directly. I think that would look like applying an like special RBAC configuration to all the namespaces.
We have 3 roles right now: contributor, maintainer, and admin. And it looks like for that deployment, changing those roles so they don't have any write permissions.
Yeah, and then adding a specific, you would have to add a specific service account that could do it. This is actually one of the things that I was thinking about, is where to create service accounts that would be usable by Argo. I think maybe it's not necessary for the app project implementation, but I think it is necessary for the impersonation implementation. If we needed them and we needed to be able to keep a user, like a tenant administrator, from being able to get the secret of that service account and then use it to create resources directly, we might need to have like a special administrative namespace to put all those service accounts in so that we can shield them from secret exfiltration. You brought up migration and nobody else has their hands up. So I added a section to the document regarding migration. We could implement all of this as long as we're not changing any of the like control plane resources, which we have plans to do, but not related to this ADR. So let's say we're not changing control plane resources. We could make all these changes without affecting any users, but they would lose the ability to create and configure control plane resources through the UI. And they wouldn't be taking advantage of GitOps. If we want to help people move to GitOps, I propose that we create a small like CLI or script or something that would allow you to, as like a tenant administrator, just run a script against your current namespace and have it extract all of your current resources and populate a local GitOps repo in like a reliable way that's been tested, so that you would know that then you can commit and merge that, and it would start syncing without, it should essentially be syncing exactly what was there before.
So that's interesting. It makes sense. There's when I brought up migration, I was thinking if that's like a day 0 migration or day 1 migration, I was thinking about day 2 migration, which is you've already exported your namespace's contents and committed it, and you have your application component, and then we move to the groups API. But let's say that's already happened, and you exported and you had your groups and components in your repo, and now we've moved to the groups v3 API, some new thing we haven't even imagined yet. And how do we manage the migration of all the GitOps repos to do that? We could build specialized tooling to do that, but then we have to build specialized tooling to manage all those things, and like procedures, your guidance for like how you do that. You upgrade the cluster first. Now everybody's broken until they get fixed. That seems actually probably the most reasonable way to do it.
One option So yes, those are two different migration things. I was talking about day zero migration. Like I want to convert from direct configuration to GitOps. There's a way to do it. A thing that we could instruct our service teams to do is that if they are building new versions of resources that are incompatible with the old ones, or if they want to like remove the old CRD from the cluster, we could ask them to build mutating webhooks that would be in place for a certain amount of time. It would give users like some chance to transition without holding up the teams. So you could have a mutating webhook that understands how to get from groups V1 to groups V2, and it like handles that, you know, in the application process. But I think we would not want to carry those, you know, many versions of those forever. We would want to use them for some limited period of time.
We'll run it. Yeah, that's the details are down the road, but like that's, you can only have one version of that API on the cluster at a time, as if it shares the same name. You know?
Yep.
And just one other thing to mention, the other day I was looking into some article about Kubernetes version 2.2 and some beta being available to users, and the point was that Kubernetes 2.2 is going to move away from YAML files, and GitOps is managing those YAML files. Obviously, nobody knows when this thing is going to come, but if we move now to GitOps direction, maybe it wouldn't be that ideal for the next version of Kubernetes which will come.
What's it going to use that's not YAML?
Yeah, I think I saw the same article, Emil, and it was only questions. There were no answers. If you find something concrete, please pass it on.
All right.
Well, how about
I want to badger people to give some feedback because we heard from the same 3 people.
what do you need, Brian? What feedback do you want?
I think what I would like, I mean, if people want to, I would like it if people would read the ADR and, you know, they could give feedback on the ADR. But maybe like you did earlier, what I really want out of this call, Ralph, is like, what can we do another straw poll?
How do you want to phrase it?
You know, I just want to know if people are feeling overall high level good about this change or bad about this change. You know?
Are you optimistic?
Yeah.
Idea to make Konflux a GitOps first system for end users. Say yes, no. Insert. Launch. Poll is live. We got 20 people on the call. Everybody, if you're off listening in the back end while doing something else, please come.
I don't see it yet.
And people are already responding.
Oh, maybe I have to. Oh, I see. It's on the other screen. Okay. Do we have to wait for enough results to see the results? I don't see them.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nobody can see it. I can see it. I just clicked the button so everybody can see it now. I assumed you could. We've got 14 out of 20 people on the call responded, which is reasonable to get, you know, an initial impression.
Yeah. Okay.
Looks
We have 0 no's and 3 uncertainties too. So okay.
Yeah. But
If
I'd
you're
say Don't take that though, Brian. I'd say as when we talked about it a little bit earlier this morning, is there's so many like holes where we need to figure out more detail. And I know you know this. Like let's make sure that we find those gaps and clear them up and clarify them before we move too much more forwards.
Yeah, I wanna get this ADR to a point where people are happy with it. But I mean, it sounds like people are optimistic and willing to help move that ADR forward and fill those holes. And that's interesting.
Like, there's a maybe where is the line between like ADR and feature discovery? I know that maybe it's blurred, but I believe like the ADR technically, like if everybody's okay with this general direction, like does that mean that ADR can be accepted and these holes can be filled up in the subsequent feature discovery?
I have a similar question, which is, Ralph, I'm trying to keep the ADR focused so people can read and review it and get the, so we can make a decision and not feel like we have to tackle every single technical detail in the ADR, which really should come in a design phase, I think.
I'll say, I think I still have an action item to write an ADR clarifying what we do in ADRs. So not written. Unfortunately, Brian, you just have to wing it, and we'll discuss in the ADR until we're happy. So take any particular subtopic, and you could move it to the consequences section and say, because we didn't decide about this, it's up in the air, and we'll have to figure it out later. And you could do that with 100% of the details, leaving only the most abstract decision. But what you might get is that, like, Andrew, me, Hugo, anybody will object to the ADR and say, we can't decide on this with that few decided details. And then we'll just negotiate in the ADR as we go, move things into clarity. It's okay to leave some things undecided at the end of the day. And it's just about, are we all comfortable enough with those particular things being undecided?
Yeah. Hugo?
Yeah, on my side, I'm looking forward to have only one flow, especially this one, because it's going to help also to move, when we need to move people around from one place to the other, having only the GitOps flow, like it makes things simpler. Like it's less of a burden to ask like a tenant to move to another cluster if we need to. But one thing I wanted to mention, it's not about the ADR, it's more about if we turn this into implementation. Currently, we have a lot of problems with Argo CD for the tenant. We don't really master this thing. I mean, we have it there, it's syncing stuff, but there's a lot of delays. And if we're going to go into the direction of everyone is doing this through that, we already need to tackle the performance issue of Argo CD. It might not saying that Argo CD is not performing well. It might just be, like we misconfigured it, we're not using it the right way, but like tenants are experiencing like sync delays of hours sometimes. So we need to like look at this first, before going too far in that. That's the only point. Ralph?
Consider at the end of the day, all it does is OC apply or kubectl apply. That's what we care about. There's other features in Argo about that. If we're going to remove most users' ability to write directly by changing RBAC, let's say in some enterprise cases, then it can be enough. It's not like it needs to do drift detection because nothing should be drifting because none of those control plane resources are changing. And there would be no sync delay. You would see it in your GitHub action or whatever you see in your GitHub CI pipeline, exactly when things are applied and it's done as a user, as a tenant.
Well, I was going to say one benefit to this, Hugo, is we would break up the Argo instance. We have one single global Argo instance for all clusters right now, which is a lot, so we would end up having an instance per cluster, I think, which is more in line with our general architectures and would help break up the load between Argo instances as well.
Yeah, that would help.
So given the poll response, one reason I wanted to get that is I wanted to talk a little bit about how we might do some of this work. This work, in addition to the application component model work that's been proposed. And another thing, which is near and dear to my heart, which is that we currently don't actually develop and run CI on our code in our upstream cluster. We run it against a staging cluster, which is not truly a community cluster. This is not in the scope of this ADR itself, but I want to propose that if we decide to go forward with this, that we would essentially write a plan to make a concerted effort to move to the new application and component model at roughly at the same time, so that we're building the new VS Code plugin for the future, not for the current state, so that we don't have to build it and then immediately redevelop it. And that we would do all this work on these new versions of services in the upstream cluster, the upstream EKS cluster, so that one, we don't disrupt our ability to build and maintain like on the current branches of Konflux, which are being built and delivered to stage. And then when we get upstream stable on all these new service versions, then we would stop delivering code entirely to stage, pivot to the new branches, and start then pulling releases from upstream down using Ralph's ring deployments architecture.
I'm confused now. We need a document to describe what that is. I mean, like, what is right now? You land commits on integration service on main.
Yep. And main gets deployed to staging first. And I'm saying we'll
Main,
create. Go ahead.
There's upstream Konflux CI. When you land something on main, Renovate proposes a change there, flipping your reference from the previous commit to the new commit. Renovate isn't. There's the Red Hat App Studio infra deployments repo. This is what we're talking about, and it's not necessarily the case that it goes to stage first.
But it does in practice. Like people are not running their PR tests against upstream.
They're infra deployments PR tests.
Even their individual, like if I look at how, I need to write it down, but like the way I see it right now is like everything sort of happens in the repo and then staged down. Like the upstream.
Brian, I think I lost Brian on network.
Yeah, same here.
Bruno's got a hand up. Go for it, Bruno.
Isn't there an effort to start testing our services on the upstream version ongoing right now with the dev team?
Adam, is Adam on the call?
Yes, I am. Could you say that again, Bruno?
So my understanding is that there is an ongoing effort to start testing the services with the upstream clusters and directly on our repos, like ongoing right now, at least for the integration service.
Yeah, for integration service, yes, but I don't know how this applies to infra deployments at this time. But really, the only work that's been happening is we're testing on a Con cluster on the upstream repository for the individual services. There is a feature out there to investigate changing things with infra deployments and how that's being tested in CI, but nothing's come of that yet. But I can find some info to share with you.
Like, doesn't infra deployments have information about all of our deployments, Ralph?
Things are blurred here, though. Like, it has information about all of Red Hat's deployments.
Correct. Like, that should not be commingled with our upstream development and deployment process.
I don't know what you're talking about. Like, if you make a change, if you're talking about a pull request on, like, again, integration service, and you want that CI to be run in an EKS cluster, is that it at the end of the day?
When it's merged, I want it to be deployed up to the EKS cluster. I want the EKS cluster to be running the latest code from all the services at all times, and I want us to cherry pick releases from that to bring down to stage.
Okay. So we're not talking about pre-merge on integration service. We were talking about testing changes. That's what I thought we were talking about. And so that's what Adam and Kuno were just talking about a second ago, and that moved independently. So this looks like what? You merge changes on integration service, renovate notices, updates Konflux CI, and that would function as an infra deployments repo for an EKS cluster.
Right. Like we can work out I think, yes, you can work out the details, but the main point I was trying to make is that we can move towards that and like be working towards this new state we want to be at in that upstream without disrupting our current deployments to stage, so that we can work to get to the point where we're ready to cut over and then like cut over. We're going to need to have like the ability to work on this new thing and still deliver maintenance fixes and features to to what we have today at the same time.
Yeah, it's so nebulous to me. It doesn't make sense. What is the new thing here? And you're just helping me understand, right? We're talking about the GitOps, the UI change.
We have three things we have several things we need to land that we could be landing at the same time and getting working upstream. The new application component model, the GitOps repo registration service, the UI without the ability to configure, an integration service with any changes necessary for the application component model. We can get all those things working upstream while preserving our ability to deliver maintenance fixes and features, to our current users. And then once we get those new things working, we can completely cut over to that new system and have I think a fully working upstream delivery system.
You've not sold me on this idea. All guidance suggests that delivering incremental value and making sure you're still working the whole way along, all the way to production, suggests that's the best way to avoid and to improve success time to success at the end of the project. If we cut things over to Konflux v2 branch and begin developing everything there, the unknowns about how that's going to impact downstream deployments just accumulate and accumulate. I think we should at all costs try to keep developing on main and continuing to deliver to our downstream deployments the whole way through as we deliver each and every piece of that. And it's not to say that we can't do that, make a brand new set of v2 branches. Sometimes we need to do that, but I think I need more material to understand why that's necessary.
I'm not against what you're saying, but I'm worried given given our historical velocity. I'm worried about if we decide, for example, to start working on that new thing, how long will we be stuck, but without being able to deliver anything? Because we will have to get that and the migration to the new model going before we can, as you say, deliver incremental, features.
I worry. I have the same maybe root of worry as you, but I worry that if we split and started doing some separate independent upstream thing, that the total time at the end would be 2 to 3 times as long.
Cool. Well, we've hit time.
We sure have. I'll end recording. Thanks for
today.
It was a good call, yeah. All right. Thanks. Bye all.